Welcome to Blueprint to Billions, Leverage and Legacy in Apartments.
Welcome to Season 2 of Blueprint to Billions, where legal strategy meets real estate scale. HUD attorney and multifamily housing strategist Terry Bruner has spent his career guiding developers, nonprofits, and investors through complex housing transactions with a focus on building legacy and leverage. I'm Evan Mack, and last time we kind of defined wealth. Now it's time to roll up the sleeves. In this episode, we will lay out practical first steps for building legacy, even if you don't have those millions. From early entry points into HUD deals, into the habits that keep wealth growing, this conversation is about turning theory into action. This is From Theory to Action, building the first bricks of wealth. Terry, sir, welcome back.
Good to be back, Evan.
Awesome. Now, last time we kind of defined that wealth in real estate. Today, let's get real practical. Where does this actually start?
I think it starts where you are. So, obviously having a plan, as we talked about in prior episodes, is important. But you start really with your network. So if you are interested in real estate, then you need to go talk to people who know real estate. And you need to find where those people are. And I mean, there's a real estate group called CCIMs. It's a commercial real estate designation. Those people obviously are involved heavily in commercial real estate deals. And there are any number of brokers, real estate brokers out there who deal with specialized segments of the real estate market. So you need to, first of all, do your homework, start reading on, what some of these structures and these deals look like. And then you need to educate yourself about, the people in the space who are the players working in those particular spaces. Because if you don't do that, you're sort of flying blind, so you have to really educate yourself on not only the lingo, but how the typical deal may be structured, how, in fact, people have found their way. So you're kind of doing just deep diving on backgrounds and history. Once you've done that, though, you actually want to figure out where are the projects. And so for a lot of the deals that we work on, many of them obviously are very complex and sophisticated deals, but every complex deal at some point started very simply. And so you need to break it. It's like a math problem, right? You break it down to the least common denominator. And the least common denominator is oftentimes land and money. So you figure out where those are and how you can access them. And then you go from there. And again, I'm not trying to make this, in any sort of simplistic exercise, but you do need to just break it down to its lowest common denominator and start where you are. And so if you're someone who's new to this, and let's say, I don't know any real estate people, I don't know any people who are CCIMs, I don't know any brokers, then you need to start asking your network, where do I find those people? And so maybe there are meetups with these people. Maybe there are things that they do or don't do that you need to become privy to. And then you figure out based on where they are. Then I would recommend, you start just having some conversations. Most people will take a 15-minute conversation over the phone. Most people will take a 30-minute coffee, conversation, assuming you're planned and assuming you're not wasting their time. So don't go into this willy-nilly. Do some background, do some homework, and then reach out to the people who you think you need to know. And then that's where you start. And those people are going to lead you to the deals.
Good stuff. So how do you advise these people who kind of feel behind in the wealth game? Like people with debt, Gen Z, or anybody that's just getting started at all?
Everyone started somewhere. And I want to be very clear about saying this, because I have younger family members and they always paint a picture for me around how life is fundamentally different now than it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And many of my younger family members, and I'm talking about people who are in their early 20s, they love to tell me about all of the things that they're confronting. And my snide remark to them is always, you are the first people ever to be born who are young.
My dad would say, man, we ain't nothing y'all going through that we ain't going through. I ain't trying. My dad is not trying to hear none of that. He would never try to hear it.
Right. And the worst thing you can say to someone who is in their early 20s or a teenager, the worst thing you can call them is young, because it sounds like a put down. It sounds like now you're putting me down, and you're
even though you are young.
Yes, it is an objective fact that you are
young.
Yeah, it's an objective truth. I understand. So when I say that, I'm not saying it because I don't understand that there's a different reality for many, because there are. But I think when you are behind, or you perceive you're behind, the first thing you have to do is start.
Hmm.
So, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one tiny step. That's what needs to happen. You just need to start. And whatever starting looks like for you, maybe, for example, starting is, I'm going to contact someone who's really knowledgeable about real estate and learn about real estate. Maybe starting is, I'm going to find a publicly traded REIT, and I'm going to take $5 from my next paycheck, and I'm going to put it in a REIT. Or I'm going to take my Starbucks coffee money for that month, and I'm going to take that money and forego my coffee and put that in a REIT. But it starts with mindset. So much of life is about mindset, where you start, and constantly bolstering that. So if you're behind, like, if you're a millennial, and let's say you're 40 years old, and you say, "Man, I haven't even started saving yet." Okay, yeah, would it have been great if you started at 20? Yes. Would it have been better if you started at 20? Yes, but you didn't. But are you going to be stuck now with this sense of, like, I may have 40 plus years left on this earth, and I'm just going to take those 40 plus years and just let them linger? No, I'm actually going to do something with that time. You
Hmm.
still have time, and for most people, there is still time. I recently read an article of a gentleman who's in his 80s, and I can't remember the sourcing, but it was, one of these doom scrolling kind of deals. And he
Yeah.
was in his 80s, and he said he'd never invested in the market before, and he took this class with, I think, it wasn't a broker, but it was someone who used to work on Wall Street, and then she started her own sort of investing club. And so he took one of her classes. He took some of his money that he had in a simple savings account, and he invested that money. And he said, for the first time in his life, in his 80s, he had actually made money that he had no clue he would ever make.
Wow.
You can still start, and I think that's the message. So if you're behind, the number one key is just start.
Hmm.
Start someplace. Go invest in something real estate related. If you can't, like, if you don't have enough money to go, buy a house or buy an apartment complex, again, maybe you can get with your friends or your family members. Maybe you get with your brother, sister, whomever, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and you guys pull some money, and collectively you invest in a REIT. But there are ways that you can start. I mean, I know, for example, not to drone on about this, but there's a client that we represent here locally. It's actually a nonprofit. They're building an apartment complex, and they're asking for an investment. I think a starting investment of like $10,000. Now, if you don't have $10,000, that sounds like a lot of money. But $10,000, relatively speaking, in a big project is relatively de minimis amount of money. Maybe you don't have $10,000, but maybe you and nine other people do have $1,000,
Hmm.
who then can purchase something in that same development, doing that. So it's about starting.
Let's talk about that myth that you need millions to start building legacy or wealth. What's the real first step to build that wealth? Maybe using real estate.
I think for most people, their first purchase, whether that's a home, like a house or a condo or something, usually that's the biggest thing that they have purchased to that point. It's probably the biggest investment. I think the most practical thing you can do is to just buy something. Even if you're not going to live in that place, even if you have no connection with that place, if you think it's a good opportunity, buy it. Now the question then becomes is, well, what if I don't have money to buy it? Well, then you need to leverage your assets that you do have. Maybe you have great credit. Maybe you have a wonderful job and great credit. Maybe you don't have great credit, but maybe you have a family who's willing to float something for you,
Hmm.
if you take them a tangible business idea. Again, I think it goes back to the answer I just gave, which is about starting. So
Right.
I would just find something to get in on the ground floor. Like, really, it's all about just finding something and then making it work. Does it have to be the perfect investment? No. Does it have to be the perfect project? I can assure you it probably isn't, because they really don't exist. It just needs to be something that's tangible. And I'm assuming that, if you're in, a fairly decent area of the country, decent meaning a place that has, people. And again, people could be, is a relative thing. It could be a place that has 5,000 people in it. But I'm just
Mhm.
saying, like, unless you unless you live like in the Arctic tundra where there's no one there except you and five other families, there's probably opportunities. And this is, I think, where people need to be diversified in their thinking. Obviously, we deal with a lot of real estate and a lot of multifamily real estate in particular.
Hmm.
Maybe it's not an apartment complex as your first purchase. Maybe it's a laundromat.
Okay.
Maybe it's a gas station. Maybe it's maybe it's something as simple as someone's I don't know, someone's backyard accessible dwelling unit that they want to sell. Or maybe it's a tiny little house that you buy, like literally those tiny houses, like
Yeah.
those are everywhere. Maybe it's something like that, and then scaffolding up from there. But the biggest thing to get into these sorts of deals is you've got to have capital. So you've got to have resources. So the question is, like, where do I get those resources? And I think for most people, stop thinking about like some big shot on the arm and just start thinking about how can I build steadily over time? Might take me 10 years,
Right.
might take me 15 years, but a plan is always going to defeat a no plan.
In HUD transactions specifically, what are some accessible entry points that don't require, those, deep pockets?
I find that in most of the deals that I work on, everyone's looking for what they call equity. Equity just means I want to go raise some money.
Mhm.
If you get to know the people who are in these sorts of deals, so this is where you need to know the brokers, or you need to know the real estate people, and you need to kind of build a network, a bench. There are investment clubs, investment groups out there, many of which you can find on Facebook, LinkedIn, all of those publicly available sources. But if you find groups like that, they oftentimes serve as kind of an aggregator for these deals,
Right.
where maybe a developer or someone who's looking to purchase, maybe they're looking to raise $1 million. Maybe they're looking to raise $2 million. And for a lot of those deals, if you've got, some pennies to rub together, not to give this short shrift, but if you've got some money to rub together to piece together, a lot of times they will give you a share of or a percentage of that deal. Now, admittedly, if you don't put a lot of money in, it's going to be a tiny share, but sometimes it's all you need, because not only is it about building the wealth, so to speak, that comes with it, it's also about building the knowledge chops and about the experiential chops to be a part of these things.
Hmm.
So once you find an entry point like that, then you want to stack them. You want to take one, and then you want to find another, and then you want to continue to find the next one. And the accumulation or the aggregation of those is what's going to ultimately make you liquid enough, savvy enough, sophisticated enough to go put together your own deal. And that's
Hmm.
ultimately that's the plan. That's the game.
Terry, we talked about it before, though. You said that HUD and TPA deals aren't necessarily just for big players, but can you tell the people at home why?
Well, so historically, the reason that HUD was created was really for two twin, reasons. One was to bolster the housing supply in the nation. So everyone goes wild about the housing part of it. It does stand for housing and urban development. The second was basically for economic development. And it gets the name, people think of it as like a city thing because urban is in the name, but there are a lot of HUD deals that are put together in towns and municipalities with under 50,000 people. There are a lot of affordable housing deals that get funneled through HUD in those places, and there are some market rate deals that get funneled through those places. Those deals may not be $40 million deals. They might be $1 million deal. The process is going to be the same for 1 million as it is, for 40 million, but the relatively smaller scale of the deal means that the price point is accessible to other people. So chances are someone who's really, really deep pocketed, they're not going to go for the $1 million deal that maybe has, 40 units in it. They
Hmm.
may not go for the $700,000 transaction in some town or some small city with 50,000 people, because they don't think they can make enough money on it because it only has 20 units. But someone can make that go. And so a lot of this is about finding the opportunity. And for many people who have some liquidity, and by some liquidity, I just mean some savings.
Right.
And people, if your network's big enough, people can then go out and find others just like them who you can aggregate that money, and you can play the role as kind of the sponsor, the aggregator, or even in some cases the developer who can actually put these things together. So sometimes it's not just about the money, it is about the sweat equity that you have and about the knowledge savvy that you have to go and find deals like that. And so a lot of these deals, frankly, particularly if they're Section 8 or what are called housing assistance payments deals, those deals may not cost a ton of money. They just need some, some extra loving care from a would-be owner who wants to put a little work into it and see if they can make money. The other thing I'll say
Mm,
about those particular deals, like if you're buying a Section 8 property, a HAP deal, the
right.
government's going to pay you a subsidy on those units every month. And so if, let's say you're relatively cash strapped, all you got to do is come up with enough money to acquire the building. And if you go to a bank and you get a bank loan and you got a little bit of equity there, you can easily see how this could come to fruition. I mean, we literally just closed a deal like that yesterday, which was a
Wow.
HAP assignment deal. Someone was selling a property. I think it had 50 units or just over 50 units in it. We've got a person who never owned a HUD property before, now does own a HUD property before,
Wow.
and he was able to leverage some of his money, some of his parents' money, and probably some other people that he knows to put this together. I don't want to paint the picture that you can show up with nothing. You have to have something, right?
Right.
You're gonna have to have some money. You're gonna have some relational capital, either with a bank or people that you know. But I don't want people to walk away after hearing this as though you need millions and millions of dollars to play in the space, because frankly, it's just not true.
So in the next episode, we'll connect the dots, how these deals specifically multiply wealth for whole communities. But what's the one aha you want listeners to carry forward?
I want people to really understand that everything is interconnected. So the average client, maybe I shouldn't say average, but there are a significant number of clients. They say, "Hey, I'm going to build this thing in some area." Let's say there's a region of town here in Houston called the Houston Heights, and it went through many changes. It's gone through many changes over the last 25 years, but now it's become one of those hip, popular places.
Wow.
Whereas 20 plus years ago, it was basically a bedroom community in the city that was a little run down.
Mm,
So there are plenty of developers now who are playing in that area of town. The structures now look completely different than what they looked like 25 years ago. So you've literally taken shotgun houses, and now you have these gleaming apartment buildings that are 10 plus floors high, and so the character of the neighborhood looks different. And I think what a lot of developers don't understand is that when you become sort of the first adapter, the first mover in a development or in situations like that, someone is looking for a proof point. And I don't know if what has happened in that area of the city, in the same way as other areas of the city. I don't know if that was planned or if that was coordinated. But what I suspect happened is that you had a couple of developers who went in, had a few ideas. They said they were going to build a couple of buildings, and then over time, someone else, it's like the ultimate copycat. Someone else said, "Well, if they can do it, I can do it." I think for community groups and for families, if you actually sat down with a real plan that was coordinated, and you went and had conversations with city officials, with local community officials, nonprofits in the area, churches, you name it, and said, "Here's what I want to do, and I
mhm.
want to partner with you in how I do this," it could literally be transformative and game changing.
Wow.
I don't think a lot of real estate deals, particularly the ones that I and my firm do, I don't think a lot of those deals really have that sort of intentionality behind it. At least going into it, it sort of emerges. But if I could take a developer who was building something new from the very start, and what I've taken to doing is doing just this from the very start, asking the question of what do you want this to be like? And let's say when you're 5 years in and you've got a family of four, you've got two kids, let's say one's in fourth grade, one's in first grade. What do you want their neighborhood to look like?
Wow.
And if you brought to bear everybody who could potentially play a role in that, like, if they're retailers, for example, is there a grocery store nearby? Are there pharmacies nearby? Are there parks nearby? If you brought to bear those resources, you literally could transform the lives of most people who live there and who would
Mm.
live there.
This kind of gets into your other, your other endeavor, the niche practice. But for lawyers or professionals building their own practices, how does this principle, kind of that first bricks, kind of apply to them?
I used to think when I began my legal career, I was always looking for the shiny object. I was like, well, this is good here, but if I could just do those deals, man, it'd be so much easier, so much better. Path would be so much, just such an easier road of it. What I came to understand over time, Evan, is that an expert in anything has value.
Mm,
I'm sure there's an expert in dirt remediation.
right.
Somewhere in Indiana or Wyoming or wherever else in the world, and that person's probably the go-to person when there's a need of dirt remediation. I'm making this up, by the way, but I'm just saying there there is any number of things out in the universe and in the space of life where someone needs an expert for that thing.
Absolutely.
And so when I think about what it took to get to this place in my career, it really is no different than the advice I'm giving would-be investors and would-be borrowers in HUD deals. You essentially start where you are, and then you become the expert in that thing. So if you are, if you're running a practice or starting a law practice, for example, where you do, personal injury cases, maybe your thing is you only represent people who've been rear-ended by drunk drivers.
Hmm.
And if you're the attorney who's representing only people in that class or category of cases, chances are you're going to be someone recognized as the go-to person in that particular thing, in that particular world. Doing that makes everything so much easier. You don't have to figure out who your target audience is, who you're marketing to, who are you trying to actually sell to, who
Hmm.
is it that's going to show up for you. All of that starts though with the premise that you're going to pick something or one or two things, and then you're going to become an expert, a go-to person in that thing, and it makes everything easier. Does it happen overnight? No. And in our microwave society, is that a problem? Yes.
Hmm.
But if you start, ultimately you do get someplace.
Hmm. Terry, sir, appreciate the time.
Thanks, Evan.
And thank you all for tuning in to Blueprint to Billions. If you're navigating HUD-backed development and want to elevate your credibility from day one, connect with Terry Bruner at terrybrunerlaw.com. And if you're an attorney looking to build a legal practice on your own terms, outside of the big firm pressure and into the niche that actually reflects your values, check out Terry's course at thenichepractice.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone else that might find this information helpful. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.